Thanks everyone for joining us. This is Brave New History. We're here with León, formerly known as Quixie. We have the ellipse here. Thank you for joining us. It's fun. Let's see. He's pretty familiar with Marcion is a big favorite, as it is of mine, and the Dutch Radicals, and actually helped out Robert M. Price for a bit with his book back in the day. And
the book is it's a collection of neglected essays of Paul Tillich called The Ground of Being. It's a pretty good book. You should check it out.
Yeah, for sure. And let's see. So you might notice that we're both wearing black shirts. We obviously intended that in preparation. You have no idea the level of preparation that went into this. So
pre-production.
What's that?
Pre-production.
Yep, there you go. It's just endless. So we nothing but the best here. So that's the gist of it. And what would you say? Let's see. Maybe we'll talk a bit about. Start with the Dutch Radicals. Thoughts on that, or if you want, did I miss anything that you'd want to be introduced with?
No, I mean not really. I think I should describe myself a little bit in relation to what we're talking about. I don't because I don't want to like have any pretense about being an expert on anything. I'm not a historical expert by any means. But what I am is somebody who got turned on to the field at the turn of the millennium through the work of the Jesus Seminar, and that was kind of like my introduction to Christian origins. And over the years, up until the year 2017, when I went to the island of Puerto Rico to help the family do some things, and Hurricane Maria rolled over me, at which point all of my Christian origins studies came to a screeching halt. But before then, I was a pretty avid consumer of all the literature, and over the years, I used to argue. In the beginning, in the early days, I used to argue for historicity, believe it or not, pretty forcefully at times. But somewhere along the line, the arguments just stopped being persuasive. And some of the counter arguments became more persuasive. And I kind of see myself as a reluctant mythicist. Somebody who's kind of like, I can go either way because it really doesn't matter to me, But to me, it makes more sense. It's more probable that the legend is entirely. And I mean, the people who have influenced this thought on my part probably have been primarily Robert Price, who was my introduction to that kind of thinking, Earl Doherty, whose book I think is probably one of the best on the topic, and Richard Carrier by extension, because he basically takes Doherty's thesis, and we've all heard about his use of Bayes' theorem. He tries to quantify it. But you asked me about specifically the Dutch Radicals now? The Dutch Radicals?
Yeah, wherever we want to go with it.
Okay. With all this in mind, where I left off in 2017, I was reading a lot about Marcion. Many, many good books. Many good books have been written in the last, let's say, 30 years. And even before that, because Joseph Tyson, John Knox, like really good books. But more recently, there was a book by Judith Liu, a woman from, where's she from? I think she might be from New Jersey. But anyway, but I got really interested in Marcion and what I saw as the Marcionite influence on the early church, and even possibly on the writings themselves. I'm kind of the opinion that the Dutch radicals, the methods that the Dutch radicals used, and by Dutch radicals I mean Lohman, Van Manen, Pearson, the guy whose name I could never pronounce, Van der Burg, whatever his name is. The same methods that these scholars, genuine scholars, and even Schweitzer recognized them as such back at the turn of the century, posited, they used the methods to demonstrate that the pastoral epistles and some of the other books that have over the traditional telling of the tale have been considered Pauline. These gentlemen were pretty using comparisons, language, all kinds of different methods. They demonstrated that these epistles were very, very likely not genuinely Pauline. Nobody seemed to really bat an eye over that because everybody kind of suspected it anyway. I mean, for the most part, who really in the 19th century would have suspected that Hebrews, for instance, was a genuine Pauline writer? But anyway, these gentlemen demonstrated that Timothy was not genuine and Titus were not genuine, and then that was Schleiermacher, and Strauss, and then F.C. Bauer came along. And he basically demonstrated that, no, using the same arguments that Schleiermacher was using, you could demonstrate that basically all of them, except for these four, in First and Second Corinthians, Romans, and what's the fourth? First, Second Corinthians, Romans, and
Galatians.
Galatians, yes, thank you. He posited that only these four were the core. He gave them a special name, and then the other ones he posited were most likely inauthentic. And the reasoning, I don't want to go into the weeds into this, but it has to do with, you could demonstrate that they're kind of patchwork sewing together of different documents. They're not necessarily from one single mind. It's more the appropriate way to look at it comes from a school of thought. And with that thought in mind, they reflect an ecclesiology already, which would date them later than what we traditionally date them as the 50s and the 60s. These gentlemen started positing that maybe these documents came from the first, second, third decade of the second century. And these things are all arguable, But then Bruno Bauer came along. And he was kind of, I called him on one of my writings on my blog, I called him the enfant terrible of the 19th century academy. He kind of got kicked out of the academy for being too radical, quote unquote, for speaking about all the things he disliked, let's say. And he started writing these extremely radical books in which he posited that, no, really, if you're going to do, because one of the things about F.C. Bauer is he argued that the other epistles might be inauthentic, but he didn't really argue for the four that he kept as authentic. He just said they're authentic, right? And so Bruno Bauer came along and said, well, what's to keep us from even looking at these with the same lens? And he determined that no, all of them were very likely inauthentic. The same reasoning, right? They're especially you look at a document like Romans. Romans is a patchwork quilt with all kinds of stuff stitched together, And I believe that that's true. That I think you could, I think that reading the Pauline corpus as though it were the mind of one individual is no longer a defensible argument. And it hasn't been since the Dutch radical school. But, and this is something that I think Robert Price is correct about, is it's their arguments went neglected all these years. Like the academy just kind of looked at them and went like this and didn't really respond, I wrote an essay, actually. It's probably the best essay to read on my entire blog. It's called mythicism as idea non grata. If any of the listeners want to go check it out, the blog is mythicismfiles.blogspot.com, and it's something I haven't worked on since the hurricane rolled over me. But if anybody would like to discuss any of those things, I'd be happy to answer any questions. But what we're talking about is all talked about in that particular essay there. Is there any questions you have for me? Or?
Yeah, so maybe we could get into the weeds a bit of, why the 7, what are they called?
The 7 authentic Price. What did Price call them? The what 7?
The lucky 7.
The lucky 7. Which
but that
makes sense. That's good.
Yeah, I'm disproportionately towards Dr. Bob, so I'm inclined to call them the lucky 7, not the 7 authentic. Right?
It's all good.
But so the idea is the same. We'll look at theology that doesn't really exist at the time that it was said to have been written, that doesn't exist in the text at the time. And we look at linguistic style doesn't seem to exist at the time. It doesn't seem to be consistent. Well, like with like Titus seems to be like a whole different writing style, right? Where the authentic ones, or the lucky ones, right? However you want to call it, they're very like highbrow, right? And it's what's that style where like it's just one giant continuous run-on sentence in the Greek, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't preclude the stitching that's going on. It might be one giant run-on sentence, but I think we could see. I mean, I'm not prepared to go into really deep weeds right now because it's been 5 years since I stopped. But I think that it was very clear to me that Romans, for instance, is a patchwork quilt of several different documents stitched together, and so they managed to stitch it in a way that made the run-on sentence continue, right? But it's still a patchwork quilt, and I think that's been the opinion since. I wish I was more prepared for this.
Yeah, no worries.
The passage of time. Names kind of escape me right now.
Yeah.
Names and dates.
Do you recall the reasons people give for the authenticity of Romans? Why that makes the list?
No, but Bruno Bowers and the Dutch radicals, their whole thing was, if you're going to apply this method to invalidate Timothy, when you apply it to Romans, you can't avoid coming to the same conclusion because of all the seams. It's obviously not the work of one mind. It's obviously not the work of one mind. And that's the argument is, if you're going to apply these methods and claim that this document is inauthentic, and it's not quite a two quo creed, which is an argument that could be levied against that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, if you're going to argue the same, if you're going to make these arguments about these documents and find reason for doubt here, then I think that essentially what happened was F.C. Bauer approached the cliff, stopped because of his religious sensibilities, and said, okay, we have to stop here, because now we're really like, if you kill these 4, essentially, which is what I believe, is that we have zero primary documents about the entire edifice of Christian origins. Because I think everybody already agrees that the Gospels don't come from who we thought it came from, But if we do the same thing now to Pauline writings, which are supposed to date back to the 50s and 60s, then we have nothing. And that's dangerous. And so F.C. Bauer came to the precipice and said, I think I better stop here. Bruno Bauer said, screw you guys, I'm going over this hill, but essentially, I think that they're right. And I think if you critically examine Romans and Galatians and even First and Second Corinthians and the rest of it, these are supposed to be the earliest writings, first of all, with the exception, some people posit Thessalonians, but I think most people really, the consensus really, for whatever that's worth, is that Galatians is the earliest.
Yeah. And Steve Mason gives a defense in that, sometimes it looks like we're getting half of a conversation and a lot of it doesn't make sense absent that conversation.
Correct, yeah.
Right? So it seems like it doesn't have like the hallmarks of a forgery, in that if you were to forge it, you'd want to make it complete. Or maybe they're just so advanced forgers that they want to make it look authentic in that way. But it just seems like just things that just seem like daily business, right? Like, I exploded at that guy the other day, but we've made peace since then. There's a passage like that.
Because the Pauline corpus to me has certain similarities with Clement, for instance, to me, and with Ignatius, the 7, by the way, letters of Ignatius. And I don't think they sound all that different from each other. I think obviously the Pauline corpus came first, because we know this because Marcion had a copy, right? But the theology, which is what you're talking about, the theology is expressed in conversations that seem to go from one to the other and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, in First Clement, the reason for dating First Clement is usually the introduction. And it's basically something like, forgive the delay in our letter. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but forgive the delay of this letter. We ran into some trouble, blah, blah, blah. We greet you now, whatever.
Yeah.
But using that short passage, scholarship, the opinion of the consensus, actually, of scholarship, just using that one passage, the consensus of scholarship has determined that, well, that must be referring to like the exploitation by Domitian, Emperor Domitian, during the year 85 or whatever, 90 or whatever it was. And so that must be what the date of the book is, right? And I'm like, isn't that like, aren't you jumping the gun a little bit? Because to me, it sounds like any other letter that I've gotten that said, hey, man, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you. I ran into some shit, right?
Yeah. Clearly,
that's what it sounds like. It could be anything.
Delayed by the reign of Domitian, right?
Right.
Clearly, yeah.
You dig what I'm saying? It's like that doesn't fly with me. I'm more skeptical than that. You can call me hyper skeptical, and I'm cool with that. And if that be the case, then so be it. But I am, and I want more than that. To say that First Clement is dated in 90 or 85 or whatever the year the consensus is right now, and not see that Clement clearly reflects a church structure. This is not in the first century, And I can levy some of those same. I read Ignatius, same thing, and I even read Paul, and I have some of the same critiques. Paul is obviously the first. And Paul is fascinating because Paul is kind of like this weird mix of like Gnosticism, anti-Gnosticism. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
The stuff that's in Pauline writings. And I think it's a puzzle. And I don't think it goes back to one individual.
Yeah, where it's just later insertions. Like it was originally very Gnostic.
Yes.
And then
Gnosticism is weird because it's like, if you're not talking about like demiurges and archeons and stuff like that, it's hard to make the charge that somebody is talking Gnosticism. But in Paul's case, sometimes he does, which is what makes him so fascinating. Sometimes he does mention words like aeons and archons and does he ever use demiurgus? I'd have to look back into that.
Yeah.
I don't think he does.
He uses pleroma.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he uses those words, which are like the key to like understanding we're dealing with
Powers,
Gnosticism here.
principalities.
Yes.
Yeah, which is very, like, I've heard it explained that it's incredibly unlikely that Gnosticism within Christianity existed in the first century. And these were just ideas in the mystery schools that were just around at the time. So while he's explaining Christianity, you have to explain it in terms of these mystery schools that existed, right? But he's not part of those mystery schools. He's just saying, well, it's like this. Heaven, well, that kind of contradicts a little bit, because if he's like, heaven is like the pleroma, which is like Neoplatonic, but it's not the pleroma of Gnosticism. But we have that phraseology because those existed at the time that later developed into Gnosticism.
Right. It wasn't full-blown Gnosticism, and that's the point. Like, even when you consider like the which is the one that contained all the Gnostic writings, Nag Hammadi or the other one?
I thought it was Nag Hammadi.
There's another one, Oxyrhynchus, whatever. But Nag Hammadi has all these writings which could be considered Gnostic. But they also have a copy of Plato.
Yeah.
Which we cannot call Gnostic. And so we have to be careful about saying, well, these are Gnostic writings, just because they were found in a place where that are known to contain Gnostic people. You dig what I'm saying? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and then there's the whole issues, like, what is Gnostic, right? I've heard.
Well, yeah. There's a whole evolution of thought, which started one way, and then it developed into all the way to, like, like you said, the Neoplatonists.
Yeah.
So.
Where, like, I'm clearly no expert, but boy, do you read Gnosticism in it. Maybe it's just kind of.
I do. In Paul? Yeah. In Paul, it's clearly there.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, though. I don't think Marcion was necessarily Gnostic. So it's fascinating to me how Marcion would have been Paul's number one fanboy at the time. Because Paul, and this is actually key, Paul was trying to co-opt the Judaic God, for lack of a better term. And I think this is one of the crucial keys to Christian origins to me. I don't think that the earliest Christians were Jews who were copying mystery religions. I think the mythicists who posit that are wrong. I think it's the opposite. I think that the early Christians were all Gentiles who co-opted for some reason, probably, and this is all speculative, but probably it had to do with the fall of the temple. They saw an opportunity. When I read the New Testament, this is the work of God-fearers, not of Jews. All of them, every single book, even Hebrews, is the work of God-fearers, not of Jews. And this is fascinating to me, because I think people are kind of seeing the history kind of like in a reverse arrow. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean, they weren't Jews who were emulating the mysteries. They were all Gentiles who co-opted the Jews' system. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a crucial point that I think people miss now in mythicism.
Yeah, where syncretism was certainly a thing. And you look at it like Moses was like the Jewish Plato, right? He's seen as like very wise, and we got to bring him into the system. And
sure, yeah.
How do we do that, right? Where there's this thing with religion.
The Jewish war opened the door somehow. The actual quote unquote Jews went to Jamnia. Supposedly, I mean, there's arguments for and against that too, but it makes sense to me that they went to Jamnia and they did their little council and they developed their new Pharisaism,
Mhm.
which became the Judaism that's still extant today. But the God-fearers who weren't in danger of being killed because they weren't Jewish, right? They were free to do whatever they wanted. I mean, and when I read every single book in the New Testament, to me, not zero of those books was written by a Jew. Like even the Apocalypse, which is a Jewish apocalypse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of the style of Jewish apocalypses of the day, seems to miss the point of the Judaism of the time.
Yeah. Now, yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, which is the strict monotheism, which was not originally there in the beginning, but which by the time that we're talking about was very definitely in place. So,
yeah. So would you believe that there was a historical Paul?
maybe, but it's kind of like there could have been. Maybe not. It kind of doesn't matter because once someone is reified, it doesn't matter anymore. Like look at Jesus. My opinion on kind of like historical Jesus is it's not so much that Jesus didn't exist. It's more like Jesus is a literary character who, to my eyes, seems to be a conglomerate of other pre-existing literary characters. And I think that such a literary character is no one. And so it's not Jesus didn't exist. That's not the way I see it. I just think that Jesus is mythical. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where that's probably when you talk to people with a mythicist position, that tends to be it, right? Like you have an onion and you're peeling it back to get the historical Christ. But there's no point at which you can say,
right,
well, we've peeled back all the layers and found it, right? You just keep peeling until there's no onion left.
And because in my opinion, we have zero primary sources, at this point, it's impossible to get to the core.
You wonder, yeah, that Dr. Bob says that what would seal the deal on historicism for him is if there's a letter from a businessman. Yeah, that says...
Find a letter in the trash pile at Nag Hammadi that says, hey, man, I ran into this dude Jesus the other day, man. He's kind of cool. Or he sucks or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess
sure.
like an oppositional opinion would be even better because they don't have the...
Right. Yeah. There's no hagiography going on at that point.
Yeah. That I ran into this Jesus guy in Jericho, and I think he was just faking his magic, right? That would do it. Like
that would totally do it. Yes,
yep.
That would totally do it for me too. But alas, no such thing exists. And maybe people who are contra this opinion might be like, "Well, you're just being hypercritical," because there's no evidence for anybody back in those days. Actually, there is. There really is. There's evidence of all kinds of insurrectionists and all kinds of stuff that happened back then. There were, the Herod had a personal historian and he wrote, and we have a record of uprisings in the Galilee and stuff like that. Not huge records, but we do have records, and Jesus is reported to have been even bigger than that. Where's his mention?
Yeah. It's a good point in that, like, we think of Jesus as poor, right? But then when we look at it, he had a personal secretary. The soldiers were casting lots for his clothing.
Yeah.
Right?
That's weird.
He had really seemingly expensive clothing, which was like a mark of wealth, right? That people would fight over. Right.
Well, traditionally they were even purple, which is the royal color. I'm Catholic, and so I know all this stuff. But yeah, you're making a good point. You're making a valid point.
that you wonder, and if anything was to survive, it would be that, you would think, right? That would show the history, or I mean, let's say
I think a record of the uprising in the temple would have survived in a real world situation. Some mention of it somewhere would have survived.
Yeah. Well, we have Josephus, right, which touches on crucified under Pontius Pilate. What was the other point Josephus touches on? Well, I think, no, crucified Pontius Pilate, right?
Crucified Pontius Pilate and the tribe. No, that's the Roman dude.
Yeah. And a thing that kind of convinces me of historicity is we have the Christians, right? We have Christos, the Christians, and as Dr. Bob says, they were really pronounced the same way, that they would be kind of interchangeable. Sure. Christians, Christ.
But the Crestus is the name that Tacitus gave the character, right?
Maybe I'm off. I thought he was mentioned in Josephus. Maybe.
No, it's Tacitus.
Maybe it's not. Yeah,
it's Tacitus.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure you're talking about Tacitus.
Gotcha. And we have a lot of the Gnostic writings refer interchangeably to Christians and Christians, and where Christus is kind of like means eloquent, and John Dominic Crossan holds on to the render unto Caesar what is Caesar's as a historical point, that he likely did say that. So you wonder, like, Christian.
Well, yeah, but John Dominic Crossan has that opinion, and he's a lovely gentleman, by the way. I've met him, and really is a really lovely person. But you're kind of arguing from authority. John Dominic Crossan says that this is likely historical, and so you're just kind of accepting it. I don't get that. I think that John Dominic Crossan's whole paradigm of Christianity growing out of a basically revolution kind of movement, that fits his narrative, right? And so he includes it. That's kind of one of my criticisms of things like the Jesus Project. It's kind of like if it fits your narrative, then you say, okay, it's probably historical. When you vote with colored beads and stuff like that, you're basically doing nose counts, and Robert Price has talked about this before. And it's kind of an interesting thing because you are kind of getting a consensus of, the academy and the scholarship, but you are just counting nose counts, and religious sensibilities come into play more than we realize. The things we're not allowed to believe. People, not me, but people are not allowed to believe, and so they just don't go down those paths. I'm sorry, I kind of strayed myself into a corner here, and now I don't know what I was talking about.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I mean, I'd say with the whole...
John Dominic Crossan being saying that it was likely that he said that. Maybe he did. Maybe he existed. I'm kind of cool either way. I just don't think it's likely that he did. Mostly for the reason that I gave. I think that the character of Jesus is just a conglomerate character made out of other previously existing, mostly biblical characters, which is a criticism that I have of people like that you called it parallelomania, where people see parallels everywhere. I'm not necessarily in that camp, but there are some. My favorite to point out a lot of the time is the number 153 at the end of John.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Where it's like, you're not going to tell me that that's not a Pythagorean number. And if you try to, I'm going to think you're just an idiot that I don't want to talk to you because you're just an apologist who's,
Yeah, and it does seem out of place with the drought of fish being 153 in the Gospel of John, where John everywhere else he's maybe not everywhere, but it's just like a large number of this and several of this, and right where he doesn't give specifics, right?
Right.
Where for the fish, it's 153.
153. And Robert Price made me laugh one time when he told the story of oh, look, it's the risen Son of God. You guys go talk to him. I'll count the fish.
That's
That just, yeah, that made me laugh. I'm like, Bob Price is absolutely right about that. 100% right about that. That's just absurd.
That's a
But
good
not only that,
point.
but then when you consider what the number actually is,
Yeah.
it's one of the Pythagorean's perfect triangle numbers.
Mm-hmm.
If you
Well, it's
take,
perfect, like everything. It's
hold on, I'll tell you. It's if you add each digit, if you add the cube of each digit, it adds up to 153.
mm-hmm.
1
Yeah.
cubed plus 5 cubed plus 3 cubed equals 153.
Yeah. Well, it's a cube number. It's what, a circular number. It has all these crazy properties to it.
But yeah,
right?
the point is
Yeah.
it's demonstrably a Pythagorean perfect number, one of
Mhm.
in the Pythagorean system that
Mhm.
Jesus quotes. Now, why is the author of John quoting a Pythagorean thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to show that he's like Pythagoras, right? Like just like Moses was equated with,
No,
you know,
right. But my
you know,
point though is this is not this, like I said it before. To me, the literary character Jesus is a composite of many other literary characters. Some of them real, some of them fictional.
Mhm.
And to me, that conglomerate is no one. It
Yeah.
can't be anyone. And so, like I said before, it's not that I'm saying Jesus didn't exist. This is entirely mythical, is what I'm saying.
Mhm. Yeah, that we have, you know, I've done a lot of thinking on 153 Pythagoras. Why is it in John, or the Gospel of John? And I've looked at the numbers where you have 265 uh, over 153. No, other way around. 153 over 265, right? That's said to be the ratio of the fish, that it's a good approximation of, like, you have the Vesica Pisces, right? Which, right? This probably isn't helpful, right? Two
Well, I mean,
overlapping
no,
circles.
you're going into
Yeah.
some Gnostic weeds, and that's cool. And I appreciate that. That's probably
Mhm.
likely true. But it's simpler than that, really. The number 153 is basically 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8, all the way up to 17. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8, all the way to 17 equals 153. That's why it's a perfect triangular Pythagorean number, because when you lay it out, it looks like an isosceles
Mhm.
triangle. You get this right like that.
So are they getting at the Trinity, or maybe you
No,
have
I
the
don't think so. I
monad?
think you could stretch it into that, but I think that's just, you're looking for Gnosticism and therefore you're going to find it, or looking for Trinitarianism and therefore you're going to find it. But no, I think it's a suggestion, maybe like you said the first time. It's possibly a suggestion that Jesus was like Pythagoras, one of those seers or sages or whatever you want to call it. Because some people thought Pythagoras divine.
Yeah.
You know.
And
And if you ask me, he kind of was one of those really like gifted people in history.
Yeah. Where I wonder, and maybe it's getting into the weeds, right? Like, my take on it, I've not heard anybody have the same take on it, is 153 is a lattice square, which means like you take 5 like on the side of a dice, right? Where it kind of forms a lattice, right? So we have 1 dot in the center surrounded by 4 dots, right? At
Right.
the corners. And then you make another set around that in the same way, right? So that now we're at 13 with more dots at the center. It makes a lattice, right?
Well, it's funny
And
because this is
yeah,
like your interest is kind of in Gnosticism and in symbolism,
yeah,
Gnostic symbolism. Like me, I'm a trained engineer, and so my interest is more like, oh, isn't this interesting? Kind of like I've actually made a joke about the difference between sacred geometry and my geometry is profane geometry.
yeah.
I don't look for the symbolism, or at least it means very little to me, other than if I was thinking in terms of Gnosticism, I would look at these things. But it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, I could see the ratio being approximately that. But I don't know. You could say the same thing about the golden ratio. It's approximately the same. As an artist, I use golden ratios and things like that all the time. So, the mysticism, the accompanying mysticism, I kind of stay away from. To me, it's just the facts, man.
Yeah. Well,
so
you wonder if they're not. I mean, they're bringing that, and it almost wants you to look into that further, right? Christ associated with the fish. It's the number of the fish.
Well, it would resolve. It might resolve. It might resolve questions that we have about. Questions about like we were talking about before, Gnosticism and anti-Marcionism and stuff like that in the Pauline corpus, and even in the Gospels, which you could argue it's even in there. So it might help us resolve some of those questions, or if you're religiously bent, it might even help you in your own theology, I suppose. But so somebody who's just kind of an observer like me, yeah, I mean, I could see the symbolism, but it doesn't really mean all that much to me.
Yeah.
Other than it's another brick in the wall of syncretism. It demonstrates more syncretism rather than less.
Yeah.
And the apologist who would want it to be one monolithic faith has a Herculean task on their hands. I think it's impossible anymore to hold to that kind of religiosity, theology, whatever. Anybody who thinks that the gospel was inspired by God and written by the apostles and blah, 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 I think they're not paying attention to the scholarship of the last 150 years at all. And I mean scholarship, not just apologetic, house cleaning.
Gotcha. So with Marcion, and he comes up with the first canon, right? And it seems to predate him, right?
Well, it has to. It has to. I think you're right about that. It has to. It predated Marcion. Marcion got it from somebody. But Marcion didn't get it from Paul. Somebody was talking about some Paul figure before Marcion got to it. Right? And if we know for a fact that Marcion was in Rome in 144, we can start thinking about the datings of some of these things, right? Well, because you've been reading some of the same stuff probably. You can comment on that if you want.
What in particular?
No, I mean, if you want to, sorry.
Well, I mean, do you think Marcion was like the where we got Christianity as we kind of know it today? That he seems to be the earliest one where we can point out. Maybe I'm off,
yes.
But
no, I think Marcion was one of the earliest evangelists as we know them.
And maybe before him, I mean, there were some texts, but it was largely an oral tradition.
Well, I think the biggest mystery to me about Christian origins, and I said this before, is why would a group of God-fearers suddenly organize, co-opt the Jewish God while the cat's away, and then turn it into this quasi-Marcionite Gnostic like thing, which has very, very little resemblance to the Jewish God.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mystery to me, and I think it's the crucial mystery of this entire puzzle. Yeah. Why would a group of God-fearers organize and take over? That's weird to me, but it happened because here we are.
I mean, I see it as where is it that a prophet isn't taken seriously in his hometown, right?
Well, which is a truth that I know to be a fact. And I
Yeah.
know this to be a fact as an artist and as a musician. It's really like you could travel and get all kinds of really good, like,
Mhm.
responses and feedback and stuff. And then you come back home and it's like, hey man, were you away? I didn't notice, whatever, it's funny,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's true.
I mean, it's like we look at Greek culture and they're really impressed with Egyptian stuff and because it's exotic, right? And Judaism because it's exotic. And we look at Mithraism, they did this as a very similar thing where they say, oh yeah, there's Mithras from Hinduism. He's a very old god. And now we're making this guy like, and it has no resemblance to the Mithras of Persia or Hinduism.
No, yeah, correct. And I think you're making a really, really valid point. But I'd like to point out also that the direction in which the flow goes, which is something I said before. The Mithraists, the people who did the syncretism of Tammuz, the syncretism of the ones that Carrier talks about, which is a few of them, and Bob Price talks about them too. Notice the direction of flow. All of them. It wasn't Mithraists trying to become Greek. It was Greeks becoming Mithraists.
Mm-hmm.
And in every single instance, this is the case. And I think this is something that I think both historicists and mythicists miss. They keep thinking that it's a Jewish sect that evolved.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's Greeks that tried to emulate a Jewish sect, is the way I see it.
Yeah, I can see that, where it's interesting how Jesus is local, Paul is local, right? And you want exotic, right? Especially like you're the elite, right? You're wealthy. You want something that's you can't get at home, right? So you import it. And that's how people know you're a fancy pants and you're so educated,
Right, yeah.
right? And you're so highbrow is because
I think that was the draw of Mithraism, especially for soldiers. It's like, yeah, I went off to war, son, and I got this. I did this ritual beneath a bull. I got bathed in bull's blood or whatever the hell it was. Ooh, Dad. Ooh, you did that? It's like a war story. You know what I mean? You were part of a frat? Ooh, tell me more. Sorry, man. I got expressive, but yeah.
No, I think that's right. Where it's less like people make it out to be like, oh yeah, they're getting ready to die and they need to know the secrets of the universe, so they can ascend.
It's a frat. It's a skull and bones society. It's a place to go drink beer, get drunk, and talk about stuff. It's a frat. Actually, technically, it was a frat / burial society. They wanted to ensure that everybody got a proper burial. And if you were a soldier, it was your insurance that you were going to get your props when you die. Your family, like seriously, your family was not going to have to like go broke.
Yeah. And that's a bit like the Oddfellows, right? Where that was a main thing, burying the dead.
Yeah. Which is actually it's a good idea. It's an admirable thing to do for people. But that said, I think that's really what was at the bottom of Mithraism, the exoticism, where you can come home and bring these tales of wonder and excitement, and you were guaranteed a burial.
Yeah,
a proper burial.
Or, I mean, I'm thinking it's just not even maybe just a story to tell, but like, wow, look at me, I'm an explorer, right?
I'm a man of the world.
All these secrets, right? So I'm going to. It's kind of like people going to Africa, and there's this tribe that has all the secrets, right? That nobody else has explored, and you got to talk with the shaman, and he revealed to you their secrets, right?
I talked to the Dalai Lama, man. I climbed up the mountain and talked to the Dalai Lama,
Yep.
Which a lot of people do. To this day, a lot of people do.
Yeah. Or, you're going off to India and you bring back Hinduism, and Hinduism, like we have kind of our own brand, right? Where it's a lot more dharmic than, because there it's every day, right? It's nothing special, right? Just like,
well, over there, it's not even really a religion. It's just a family tradition.
Yeah.
Like it's not religion in the same sense that we think of religion here. It's like your family has its shrine with its protectors and things. It's weird because I come from a background where it's not that, but some of my family is Santero, which is you've heard of Santeria,
Mm-hmm. Like a
where
merger between like
it's a syncretism between Catholicism and the Yoruba tribes, the slave trade.
mm-hmm.
That's what
That's where we
Santeria is.
get the figure. It's like the Blessed Virgin and a skeleton.
Yes.
Kind of.
Well, yeah, a lot of it. The syncretism, it's kind of involved and weeds in its own right, but because they weren't allowed to worship their old gods while they were slaves, they could disguise their worship by taking a traditional Catholic figure like Santa Barbara, who traditionally holds a sword. They would use that figure as the sword of, and Santa Barbara would be Shango, the Orisha. Orisha is like a god, a deity. And that would be, Shango had the sword. Even though Shango was male, the figurine of Santa Barbara, it didn't matter because the symbol was not the saint, the symbol was the sword. But anyway, stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah. And, I've wondered with, what is it, Santa Muerta or something like that?
No, Santa Muerte, that's more Mexican, and it goes back actually to pre-Columbian times. The Day of the Dead, the celebration of the Day of the Dead in the Southwest, predates Columbus coming. And so it's, we think, we link it with Halloween because it's November 2nd or whatever. And in many ways, it's kind of, when you look at it from a larger picture, it is related because it's related to the seasons. But there's a day that's dedicated to death as a sacred figure.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, going back to the whole exoticism thing, I wonder why it makes it into, like, when people get a tattoo, and like they get characters that they can't read, right? That's like Chinese or whatever.
I've always found tattoos to be fascinating.
And with Santeria, it seems to be like that's very overrepresented in tattoos.
Sure.
And you wonder why.
Well, because part of the tradition has to do with what kind of depends on where. Part of the tradition, specifically the Haitian tradition, relies heavily on pictographs that are kind of, the pictographs themselves are kind of like the spells, kind of like in Scandinavia, the runes. The pictographs themselves are sometimes spells.
Yeah.
So it's like that.
Got it. So it's kind of like a formula, right? To like, and then you're putting.
This is interesting though because it's touching a little bit on what we're talking about with the Mithras coming home and having look at these tattoos and they're spells and they protect me from harm. And you know what I'm saying? It's like you got that. That's like I don't know, like bragging rights or something as a soldier who traveled abroad.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, I spoke to the shaman and he did these tattoos for me, and now I'm protected from evil, or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's what it is.
Gotcha. Yeah, which it's almost inevitable that we'd get into that syncretism. You'd wonder because
that's every religion, including Judaism, including Zoroastrianism, including Shintoism, including all of them. Anything that can properly be called a religion is syncretic by necessity, because people move around, and people mix. And it's been the way of the world ever since. The Judaism of 800 BC, or I should be more technical, BCE, is not the same Judaism of 70 CE.
Yeah.
Why? Syncretism.
Yeah. No, I forget where I've heard this, but archaeologists track the spread of Judaism by the prevalence of a
Ishtar.
specific kind of the Ishtar idol.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting how that seems contrary to Judaism.
The fascinating thing about that particular phenomenon is that when we date some of these findings with the little statuettes of Ishtar, basically the spouse of Yahweh, it turns out that they're contemporaneous. The writings that were decrying the worship of Ishtar, right? In their writings, they were decrying the worship of Ishtar, but in their homes, they had little shrines with Ishtar. That's fascinating because we could date them. You know, that's fascinating to me. How you can be like, yeah, you go to church on Sunday and you preach one thing, but at home you got a little shrine and you give a little piece of bread and you do whatever you need to do to appease the gods. You know, it's fascinating to me.
Well, you wonder if, like, the reading of the scripture was a very elite thing, right? And that was something that was done over here, right? But in terms of the everyday practice, right? Like, they're coming up with polemics against it.
Yes.
But overwhelmingly, this is what the people do. And there's just a certain group that it just doesn't make its way into.
These things were everywhere, you know? It's, yeah.
Yeah.
But it kind of it gives us a little bit of window into the psychology of the people who are writing these books. You know, because they're obviously suppressing something.
Yeah.
You know, it's clear. We see the shrines and they're decrying them, but they're happening. So there's a disconnect between the lay people and the hierarchy who's writing the books.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me.
Yeah. And I have a few thoughts on that. Is kind of going back a little bit. We have the main deities of Hinduism, right? Shiva and
Kali. There are quite several. Kali, Shiva, Krishna.
Or who are the kind of primordial ones? Shiva and Vishnu.
Vishnu, yes.
Right?
Shiva and Vishnu.
And yeah, Kali,
I'm by no means an expert, but I've done some research onto it, yeah.
Krishna, of course. Brahma, you know, nobody talks about him, right? That's because of theodicy, I think, because he created it, he created the universe, but not terribly well. So, you know, he's not so much of a thing.
But I think one of the reasons why I say it's not really a religion is because it's family by family. Just because somebody worships Vishnu doesn't mean that Vishnu is represented in their family way.
And that's exactly where I was going with it. Yeah. That the number one deity in houses isn't any of those. It's Ganesh.
Yes, the elephant.
Yeah. It's Ganapati. He's everybody's favorite, but who's like in the writings and the you know, Ganapati.
The Upanishads and the Vedas. Those are the classic writings of the quote unquote Hindus.
Where you wonder that other gods are bigger, right? But everybody loves Ganapati.
Actually, one of the houses. I work as an editor, and one of the books I'm currently editing deals a lot with the history of Bengal, and so I've been reading quite a bit actually about the Indian traditions.
Yeah.
So,
and another thought I had was, if we remember Mount Sinai, where the Hebrews saw all these miracles every day, right? The cloud of smoke, or the pillar of smoke, pillar of fire, right? Saw their deliverance, saw the miracles happening in Egypt. And then Moses...
And then all it takes is for Moses to go up the mountain and they forget all about it.
And you wonder, like, were you not there? Like,
it's clearly a fictional story that makes absolutely no sense when you take it at face value. But it's a demonstration that people don't. This is not real people. This is fabrication. It's like reading Ayn Rand or something. It's kind of like you read Ayn Rand and it's like, these are not people. These are like mouthpieces for her diatribes.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, where, well, I mean,
they see the pillar of smoke, which follows them day and night, And all it takes is for Moses to climb up the mountain, and they're like, "Oh, should we get another god? What should we do? What should we do?" It's just so stupid.
Yeah.
Like, really, you really believe this happened? Really?
Yeah.
A lot of people do, but it's like, okay, I guess,
Well, and then
go on
there's
with your bad stuff.
yeah, it's kind of like the dumb disciples thing.
Yes, and Mark.
Like the people clearly don't get it, right? At least that's how it's portrayed, right? And like the disciples are just like they have no idea what's going on, and about how like they're just along for the ride, don't understand what's happening, but they're supposed to be like the inner circle, right? And the mysteries are revealed to them, but
Right. But they don't get it. They're like the Three Stooges.
Yeah, which
hey Mo, did you really walk on water that time? Hey Mo.
Yeah, and you wonder where that comes from. If it's like
well, I think I watched the video that you recently did with Robert Price, and I agree with, I think both of you were of the opinion that Mark specifically started off as a hero story. I think it's just a hero story trying to flesh out the Pauline corpus. But maybe not, because one of what the other mystery to me is the Pauline corpus is of such high Christology, and the Gospel of Mark is not, which is one of my points in doubting the early dating of the Pauline corpus, is the Christology is way too high as compared to Mark, which supposedly came after. Seriously.
No, yeah, I forget the name of the scholar. No, I think it's Steve Mason. I'm pretty sure it is, where he looks at Mark and how they talk about like this is the gospel of Jesus Christ, where he calls it the announcement. And it seems that Mark was written in the tradition of Paul and the epistles. And it's just an extension of that.
Well, it makes sense to me. I think Mark was, for lack of a better term, I've heard the term used before. The term is euhemenization.
Mm-hmm.
Mark is what happens when you finally take a mythical character like Jesus of Paul, and you flesh it out for people who need an actual biological thing. You know what I mean? Because Mark is the most human of all the characters. He fears, he cries, he yells. And so he's kind of like a believable human character. The Christology is not high at all. As a matter of fact, at the end, you don't even know what happened to him. But it's a great ending to the story because it's like you'll find him later. It's like a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I think Mark meant it as a cliffhanger. I think there was no ending.
Yeah, I think that's the general scholarly view. Is that
I agree. Yeah. It was meant as a cliffhanger. But the topic at hand, though, is the disconnect between the Pauline Christology and Markan Christology, which
it does seem a little advanced, doesn't it?
Very advanced, especially when you consider that Paul is calling Jesus Kyrios. Kyrios is Lord, which means that in 52, let's say, if the dating is correct, which I don't think it is, but if the dating is correct for Paul, in 55, let's say 52, 55, Paul is referring to Jesus as God, merely 20 years after Jesus died. Right? Mark does not, and Mark was supposedly written in 85, 70. That's weird. That's a disconnect, and that's something that should be really explored. Therefore, I don't think that the Pauline corpus dates that early. It's not my only reasoning, but that's one.
Yeah. You wonder where we have Marcion, which am I off to say those are the earliest texts that we have record of?
Marcion?
Yeah.
The Apostolicon and the Gospel?
Yeah. Do they?
It's hard to kind of be certain, but I tend to kind of agree with you. Yeah, I think that Marcion was I think that Walter Bauer demonstrated to me that the Marcionite variety of the Christian religion was the very first variety evangelized in the eastern provinces. Like they had no idea of what the Roman variety was. They only knew the Marcionite variety. And Walter Bauer demonstrated that, in my opinion, really well. And that being the case, I have no problem agreeing with you on that. That the texts, as they were being proliferated, especially in the eastern provinces, were the texts that Marcion had.
Yeah. Now, one piece that might fit with euhemerization, right, in the Gospel of the Lord from Marcion, right, from how we've had it reconstructed. You know, some people have kind of, it's so heavily quoted by heresiologists that we can probably reconstruct the whole thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it has Christ, he just appears one day. There's no birth narrative.
Yeah.
And so you wonder, like, I mean, I don't know how to take it, but that's kind of like, well, he was euhemerized. He just descended from the clouds one day, which is how people think that the Gospel of Marcion came to be, where they're saying, okay, he's in the clouds, he's in the sky, he's myth, but here, let me tell you about how he just descended one day, and here's the story.
Right, yeah.
And then, I mean, that would be, yeah.
Go on.
Well, I mean, it would fit in terms of, I mean, if you go with the direction that the gospel seemed to take is like from simple, he's really more just of an everyday guy. He's really more human than anything, right? And then in John, he's like...
In John, he's actually, in my opinion, he's a narcissistic jerk.
Well...
But I get it. It's poetic and all this stuff, but it's all about me.
Yeah, I mean,
I am.
Yeah, I mean, although, I mean, you can kind of see that earlier. I mean,
he's always talking. Forgive my irreverence. It's just kind of like
I totally get it. Yeah. And he's described as I think maybe it's Dr. Price that talks about. No, it's Ehrman, where he's the boss on the cross. Where in Mark, he's confused. Yeah. He's Jesus, meek and mild. Right.
I do like Ehrman, by the way. I do like his writings. It's just that one book that I think is atrocious.
Yeah, everybody seems to gang up on Ehrman, I think. Like even conservative scholars, right, and liberal scholars, everybody, you would think he would be kind of pleasing everybody, but everybody kind of critiques him, right?
Well, because I mean, I have my own opinions on Bart Ehrman. I think Bart Ehrman is somebody who grew up in a tradition, discarded the trappings of the theology of the tradition, but is still ensconced in the tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like F.C. Bauer, he gets to the edge and stops, even though he is an atheist and he has no horse in the race in that sense. But it just makes him stop. It's hard for people to kind of like even think about, if this is not true, then what does this mean for us? But whatever,
Yeah, and you wonder if you can kind of fill in the blanks that maybe the Christ of earlier traditions was even more simple, right? Where if we take it after John, then we have the development of, no offense to any people who are more conservative, but we have the Trinity, we have the
right. Yes,
I mean it's certain.
Like, I would bet $5 Canadian that Jesus never heard of a Trinity. Yeah. If Jesus existed, he never heard of a Trinity. That's church.
Yeah.
All of it.
The thing from John, well, it kind of depends on where you place the whole Gnostic tradition of the laughing Christ, right? Like
the laughing Christ with the Gospel of Judas?
I think it's a motif in several texts. Where
the only place I know where Jesus laughs is in the Gospel of Judas.
Gotcha, and that would be much later than John.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe like with Jesus, kind of like the jerk that says, oh, like the disciples don't get it at all. And he says, you will mislead thousands in my name. And he
Right.
laughs, right, at just how much they don't get it. Maybe that's just a take on John, where he's not only like he gives up on trying to explain it to them, and now he just laughs at them, right?
Yeah. Which kind of reflects Mark a little bit. It's been argued, and I think it's probably true, that even John, even though it's not considered a synoptic gospel, but even John was familiar with Mark.
He was really what?
Familiar with Mark.
Got it. Yeah, I kind of think, I mean, you can look at it whichever way.
He wrote his own version of the
I mean,
story, which elevated Jesus to the point of being the Logos.
Yeah. Which you wonder what's going on there, right? Like,
Well, Logos, you know that Logos is an ancient term that goes back before Jesus. Logos is the order of the universe. Logos is what, Plato and Pythagoras were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But they adopted, and this is where Philo of Alexandria kind of comes into the picture, where he was interpreting Judaism in these terms, which in a way is proto-Judaic Gnosticism. One could put it that way, even though it's obviously not the same thing. But
yeah, where Hellenistic Judaism, right, with you wonder if
it's kind of like how Aquinas was intent on making Christianity safe for Aristotle, and vice versa. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Aquinas did that. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. Now, would you say like Hellenistic Judaism is really more Hellenist than Judaism? If I can kind of...
No, not more. But they're using Hellenistic symbolism much in the way that I just said Aquinas tried to reconcile Christianity to the Hellenism.
Yeah. And the whole mysticism thing, right? Is that early, would you say, or is that...
With mysticism, what do you mean by mysticism? Like
there's the tradition with what is that? The tree of life. What do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? Kabbalah.
Oh, Kabbalah, yeah.
Right?
No, I think Kabbalah was a later development. Although it being a form of divination, let's say, it probably dates, like the origins of it probably go back way before. Because it's just divination. Everybody's been divining stuff for the history of mankind.
Mm-hmm.
The Jewish variety of it developed into Kabbalah. But I think Kabbalah was kind of put on hold while the rabbis were trying to figure out what to do next in 70 and afterward, Jamnia and afterward. I don't think they were thinking about Kabbalah at all. I think they were just thinking about survival.
Gotcha. And do you think like Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, plays a role in the development of Christianity? Do you see any parallels there?
That's a question I haven't considered before.
Yeah.
Actually.
Well, we have the Book of Enoch, right? Where
yeah.
Kind of themes.
I think it influenced the church to some degree. Probably. I'll leave it at that. I'm not too versed in that particular thread.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, but I see where it had some influence, some influence.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go as far as someone like who's the scholar who's all about Enoch? Oh, what's his name? Yeah, I'm sorry, man. It's been so long that the names evade me right now.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure either. But yeah, like we talk about parallelomania like it's divisive, or
I think parallelomania is a real thing.
Yeah, well, I think I'm a not a sufferer of parallelomania, but I enjoy it a lot, right?
But
Like,
yeah, I could see that in you. Yeah,
yeah, and I mean,
you're
not
not. You're not.
necessarily hold to it,
Yeah, but
but like
you're not caustic about it. You're more like Robert Price, where it's like, well, there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this.
100%. Yeah, and
There's this, and then there's this, and it could be this, and whatever. It could be any of those.
yeah, and
I'm
that's
cool with
one
that.
thing
Yeah.
I love about Dr. Price is it's the story, right?
Yeah.
Like, and some of them were connecting things that like how like they're so similar, right? It kind of calls out to be compared, right? Like Simon Magus and Paul being actually the same person, right?
That I'm not on board with. I think
Well,
that's a stretch.
I mean, I think it's an insane stretch, but it's so interesting. It's like it's the storytelling.
It's
speculation.
It shows how clever Price is, and not just Price. I mean, it's Herman Dettering posited the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of people did, but
Yeah.
it's clever, and it's like ooh. But as I was looking into it, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like it's plausible, I suppose, but arguing from plausibility is always weak for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes you wonder, right? Like they are very similar, aren't they? And like the whole Paul as a mini Christ, and in some ways greater than Christ, because the miracles.
Well, it reminds me of the comparisons of, like, for instance, Barabbas. In some of the early texts, his name is Jesus Barabbas, right? And so you could argue, well, actually, it's a doppelganger, right? You could come up with all kinds of speculations.
Yeah. Well, and the whole speculation with Thomas from the Gospel of Thomas, Thomas the twin, Thomas.
Yes, that's another example.
Didymus, right?
Judas means twins too. No. Thomas means twin. Didymus means twin. So it's Thomas the twin.
Yeah, and the twin of who, right? Like within
Judas the twin. Judas the twin.
Yeah. Then we're Valentinians, and like you have a twin that's your ideal self, right?
Yes.
And so it's almost like, is he the twin of Christ? Right? Is that what they're getting at, or is it?
Well, correct. But let me ask you a direct question: Do you read the Gospel of Thomas as specifically Gnostic?
Well, yes, although there's a wide area of what we would consider Gnostic.
Well, like we were talking about before, it lacks all of the words that I need. That would tell me,
yeah, this is for sure Gnostic.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it could be just mainstream Christianity too. I don't know if they depart too heavily from that. It almost
I agree with that, and with its emphasis on James and all these other things. Yeah, there are clues in there.
But I kind of see Gnosticism in it, but it's not full blown. Like there's the Logion which I just thought was weird.
It leans in that direction, but I wouldn't call it Gnostic. But yeah, it's more Gnostic than Mark.
Well, or is it? Because Mark, I mean, I'd say I'm not inclined to think that they were written as Gnostic documents, but you can read that, like, just like Christ is becoming more and more fleshed out as like he's a super big deal. He's deity or next to deity.
Yeah.
Like Gnosticism follows the same trajectory, right? Where like in Mark at the very beginning, there's that whole the devil on a high place thing that just seems to be stuck in there, right? Because they have the story, and then they have this story, and then the story before continues afterwards, right?
Yes.
And
that's one of those what they call chiasmus, the sandwiches, Markan sandwiches.
I mean, there's plenty of chiasma, right? Although this one doesn't fit a chiasma. It just seems because that's one thing.
You think it just drops off and picks up like Josephus does with the story of Jesus, where he's telling a story, then it drops off, and then he talks about Jesus, then the story picks back up.
Yeah, and then
which is one of the arguments against Josephine authenticity.
Yeah, which I mean,
here's a question: if that's an argument against Josephine authenticity of the Jesus passage, might this be an argument against authenticity of an argument for interpolation? In other words.
Yeah, well, maybe. I believe 100% that that doesn't exist in an earlier version of Mark because it just it doesn't fit the pattern.
No, I get it. I get what you're saying.
Chiasmic pattern. But I think from Josephus, I've heard he often wrote like that. Like he would just say, "Oh, and by the way, there's this,"
Well,
and then
yeah. See,
return to it. And by the
that's the
way, this
thing.
happened.
That's the thing, though, is it's kind of like you'd have to basically read the entire Josephine over to come to that determination and then demonstrate it, which is a doctoral dissertation on its own. You know what I mean? It's kind of that's a lot of work. And it's kind of like for me, once it dawned on me that we probably, and I have to stress the word probably, but once it dawned on me that we probably have zero primary sources for the entire thing, I'm like, wow, none of this matters. Wow. Because we can't go any deeper than this, than speculation by necessity. You know?
Yeah. Which, I mean, that's a thing that causes me a bit of anxiety. Like, what is this even all about, right? Like, I mean, where did the
I'll tell
gospel
you,
even come from?
I started telling you when we first spoke on the phone. How I got interested is I got a letter from a priest one day inviting me to his seminary, and I responded really quickly saying, "No, I don't have any faith. Thank you."
Mhm.
I got recommended by people in my family, and I said, "I'm glad to see that my family has such faith in me, but no, I'm not interested." But it dawned on me that I didn't know anything about this, and that's when I began studying.
Yeah.
I wanted to understand what this tradition was about. Somewhere along the road, I became a reluctant mythicist. And now I'm kind of a cynic about it all, sort of, where it's kind of like, I can go either way. Jesus existed, nothing changes.
Yeah.
You know?
Hopefully we'll find out like another.
I got my fingers crossed for a letter to appear in Nag Hammadi,
Yeah,
like
or
Bob
we'll
Price
find
says.
another trove, right?
Yeah, another Nag Hammadi trove would be really, really cool.
Or like a business records trove where there's like the Jesus section about the businessman that Jesus rubbed the wrong way, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Or
something,
like
anything.
Or yeah, you wonder of all the things that would kind of lead.
But honestly, I wouldn't bet on it because I honestly think that the entire thing is mythical. I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I mean, which is another thing where a lot of mythicists say, like, there were so many dying and rising characters. There were so many apocalyptic preachers, itinerant rabbis, right, at the time. Like, nothing about Jesus was special.
Well,
but
we know that these people existed because they were documented, which means they made a little bit of a wave. They were documented by Simon of what was the name of Herod's historian? I think his name is Simon of Perea or something. But they were documented. Where's this documentation for this supposedly special itinerant preacher?
Well,
I get it. I mean, it's asking a lot, and I know that because of the nature of writings and weather and
I mean, the overwhelming majority of people that exist, there's no biography.
Yeah, right? But that's right. But we're not talking about the overwhelming variety of people. We're talking about somebody who supposedly had a big impact on the region at a very specific time and place. When we focus in on that time and place, we find nothing. Or we find things that profess to be something, and they turn out to be nothing, which, in my opinion, is what the New Testament is.
Yeah. Or, where in astrology or astronomy, in astronomy, we're looking at black holes, right?
Yeah.
But we don't see them. We see the effects of them.
Right, yes.
And we see like a whole lot going on right around it.
Yes.
And we'll say, that's probably where a black hole is, right?
Right.
And so we can maybe say that about
but we have to be careful when we're dealing with things that are tendentious, religiously tendentious. Because the whole point of each and every one of those books is to indoctrinate a nascent church. And actually, at that point, it wasn't even nascent anymore. At that point, it was already developed, as demonstrated in books like, the Paul's books and Titus and all these other books. This was a church hierarchy. Corinthians and Galatians actually shows church hierarchy.
Yeah. And, part of me wonders if that was borrowed from Mithraism, because it seems like
No, I think
Galatians.
I have a feeling it was started by Marcion.
Galatians?
It was no the
hierarchy?
liturgy, the wearing of the robes. I think Marcion probably started all that stuff.
Yeah.
Which is a demonstration of this was all Roman wear. This is not Judaism.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the church hierarchy, the thing of like bishops and stuff like that,
mm-hmm.
there was a Marcionite variety of the church. And I think the reason why Rome stepped up their game and said, we better codify this, is because Marcion had already tried to. But that was the reason, is because Marcion had done it first.
Yeah.
And they said, we better step it up.
Yeah, with the robes and the liturgy, I look at some of this like super formal Catholic things,
Yes.
right? Where it's so like, it's only on this day when there's a bishop that we wear this, and there's like this ritual.
That's a freaking mystery religion.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
I know.
That's where I was
agree.
going with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you wonder if that's a vestige of a mystery religion, right? Like
yes.
A communal meal, like let's say Christianity started out as a mystery religion, right? Or maybe eventually developed into one, right? Which, I mean, we see all the things that we would expect to see, right? Like syncretism.
I think it's both. I think it started off as a mystery religion, but it did evolve. Yeah.
Yeah. How about reconstructing what the ritual would have looked like?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, but we don't have much to go by, and that's the point there, because all we have is a couple of phrases in Paul, a couple of phrases in Clement,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so,
reconstruct what we can, right? Where
I mean, that's Irenaeus, maybe. There's a little bit, but there's not much.
Yeah. I mean, we'll think communal meal, right? Probably existed.
It's a love feast. The Eucharist means love feast, and it was a word that was used prior to the Christian practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the syncretism is going on. Everything about the religion is syncretic. About the liturgy, yeah. The robes they wear, the timing of the ritual, everything is syncretic. The wine and the bread is syncretic. All of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe we could piece together the unknowns with, Mithraism, and it would be maybe not that terribly far off. But, I mean, we don't know much about Mithraism either.
Well, yeah, my fear, though, is that Judaism is individual enough to not necessarily, it's not a mold that it's not like a mold that a mystery religion goes into and then it comes out on the other end. It's like, it's like the Hegelian system of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And each individual case is different. They're going to pop out something radically different at the end. And so in this particular case, I honestly do believe that it's the God-fearers co-opting Judaism for themselves. And what popped out at the end seems like a mystery religion, but it's not exactly like Mithraism, because it can't be. Because if we're talking about a different theology, a different cosmology, a different,
Gotcha. So we're thinking God-fearers trying to make sense of Judaism?
Kind of, but not just making sense of it, like opportunistically co-opting it. It's like the temple fell, and the God-fearers, who were not in danger of being killed because they weren't Jews, said, well, what do we do now? We got this temple all to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, some weird, and I agree with Dr. Price on this, there was some weird, like, I want to say Levant, but it extended all the way into Egypt. weird Joshuaism going on at the time that evolved into. Now there was no Sadducees and Pharisees suppressing this kind of heresy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the heresy was welcome. Come on in. The water's fine, right? I think that had something to do with it. Something like that had something to do with it.
Gotcha.
Of course, I'm just winging it right now. I'm just brainstorming with you, but
well, that's my favorite. I like to speculate on what might be that's why I love Dr. Price so much. Is I
have enormous respect for the scholarship of Bob Price. He was kind of my intro into this particular idea. So
we're thinking everybody was looking for the new Joshua at the time, or
but it's not that simple because we don't have that many records, and we can only speculate what form this might have taken. You know, it's kind of like, you know, we're going to the bottom of the sea trying to like remove all the barnacles off of something, and by the time we get to the bottom of it, the wood's rotted and we can't find it. But I think that such a thing was going on, as reflected in people like Philo. And even to a degree, Josephus talks about it, you know? So, and we don't know what form it took, but isn't it a coincidence that Jesus' name was Yehoshua? You know?
Yeah. I mean, you can look at it and say, well, that was far and away the most common name at the time.
Yeah, so. I know. It's one of the big books of the time in the late 90s, early 2000s was Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, which that was one of its driving arguments for the authenticity, was that this is the common name and it could be demonstrated, but it's just like, yeah, it was one of the most common names and therefore you're demonstrating nothing. But yeah, that's a two-way sword.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really show a lot because, I mean, if you're going to pluck a name out of thin air, you're going to do a common name, right?
Right, exactly.
I would think. I don't know.
It's like the example I like to give is kind of like, well, they got so many details right. Yeah, just like the author of Gone with the Wind got so many details right. It's not that hard to get details right, you know, in a story, even though the story is fictional.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like the Spider-Man comparison,
right?
A lot of people like to use.
It's like, hey, it's New York City. New York City must be fictional then, right? What you're saying is that New York City is fictional? No, I'm saying Spider-Man is. Yeah. Well, there's New York City right there. It must be true. It's whatever. Yeah.
Well, I'm a believer in Spider-Man. I think
my Spidey sense.
People do get bit by spiders. Yeah.
My Spidey sense says no.
Yeah. Very true. So, with the God believers, which is kind of like maybe people aren't too familiar, God-fearers.
Yeah.
Where they were kind of Jews, but they just hung around.
They were Gentiles who were allowed in the precincts of the synagogues and even the temple. There was a court dedicated to the God-fearers in the temple on the mount. But every synagogue had a place for them too. And they were a frequent sight at religious synagogues and religious observances at synagogues and in the temple were the God-fearers. And God-fearers were simply Gentiles who, like the expression says, feared God and wanted to follow the law of God.
Yeah.
But they weren't Jewish. They had not been initiated into Judaism by way of either, you know, tradition or circumcision or whatever.
Yeah, well, there's the answer of why they never joined, because who
wants because who the hell wants that? Some people do it to this day, but no, thank you. Yeah,
the genital mutilation part, which that would be a deal breaker for me, certainly.
Yeah, I agree too.
You know, I mean, if
as an adult, no, thank you. As a child, I can kind of see it.
Children can't say no, so
right. But as an adult, I'm like, somebody who would go on and do that, there's a fanatic.
Something's off with you. Yeah,
it's like Origin. Origin castrated himself. No, thanks. I'm not following this at all. Thank you, sir. Yeah. You know.
No, I'm with that, certainly. But maybe they're looking to hedge their bets a little bit, maybe, right?
Good luck with that. Yeah, I think.
Or maybe they're
life's
not
too short
really
for that stuff.
They're not really open for converts so much. Is maybe that's a little bit of it. That I mean, you really want to be hereditary.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, traditionally, Jewish faith is a hereditary handed down, just like any other culture. It's just procreation. You just make more Jews. Christianity these days seems to be that too. Is you just make more babies and then they grow up in this way and boom, that's what they are. You know, that's all Judaism kind of is now. You know, because there are plenty of atheist Jewish people now, especially after the Holocaust. You know, secular Jews.
Yeah.
And I kind of consider myself Christian in that sense. I'm an atheist, but I grew up in a matrix that's so, old world Catholic that that's part of who I am. You know, I mean, look at me, I'm wearing black. No.
There you go. You need just a Roman collar.
Right? Yeah.
You're good.
Which sometimes I've worn it on Halloween or something like that.
Yeah.
I have to confess, I actually stole a priest garb just for that purpose once.
Yeah. I bet you could buy them on Amazon.
Yeah, but back in the day, I was a stupid kid, so I just stole it. But yeah.
Yeah. So, with the whole variety of Christian thought, right, where it's like not, or at least in early days, and maybe still is, like there's an incredible variety, right? You could be Gnostic, right? You could have unorthodox views, right? Where I kind of wonder if could categorize myself as kind of in that.
Well, I would be just a secular Christian because I'm completely an atheist. I don't understand what gods are or what they're for, other than sociologically, anthropologically speaking. I know what they're for in that sense, in the Joseph Campbell Jungian sense. But the actual reification of a metaphor makes no sense to me. Like an actual God out there looking down on us makes absolutely no sense to me. And so in that sense, I can't really be a Christian.
Well,
but
I mean, let's look at it like the monad, right, is unknowable. We don't know anything about it. Is it really a person? Well, I mean, it's hard. You can't say anything concrete about it, right? And so, I mean, is it a force? It is a person? Well, it's just it's its own thing. And the light of the monad is completely different from the light that we have.
Well, if I may express it, I think I can encapsulate my entire theology in probably a really quick sentence. It's just a sense. My entire theology consists of a sense of wonder at the fact that the cosmos, one tiny little corner of the cosmos, became conscious and aware. That's mind-blowing to me. But that's the entirety of my theology. I go no further than that.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that's kind of all you need, really. I think if you've heard of Lawrence Krauss.
Yeah, actually, he teaches where I live. He teaches at ASU, which is a few miles away.
Yeah.
I know who Lawrence Krauss is. Actually, I enjoyed his History of Nothing. What's it called?
I think so. History of Nothing.
Something like that. It's something.
Something from nothing or nothing.
Yeah, something like that. But I read it when it first came out. Yeah, I enjoy him.
Yeah.
I read most of those books. It's kind of funny because I became a reluctant mythicist, but I've read probably most of the books on the topic of the last 150 years. I wouldn't say all of the books, but most of the books, like more than 50% of the books, probably written on the topic, which is about, let me do the math.
Yeah.
That's like 800 books or something that I've read on the top, on the subject. And I mean, not to boast, but like I met John Dominic Cross and I met Marcus Borg. I met John Shelby Spong. And it's been a really cool journey that way. I've met some really beautiful people along the way.
Yeah. I really enjoyed Dr. Spong or Bishop Spong.
Yeah, he was a beautiful man. He really was.
Yeah.
Although I have a bone to pick. I mean, he passed away, and may he rest in peace. But I had a bone to pick with him because I was talking to him at the time,
Yeah.
and I asked him some very specific questions about his current book at the time, and he goes about the one of his books, and he goes, "Well, you have to, in order to answer that book, you have to read my new book." And so I went out and I bought it, and it didn't answer my question. So I had a bone to pick with him the next time I saw him, but unfortunately, he passed away. But he was a beautiful man.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a good guy. I enjoyed meeting him.
Yeah.
But I read both the historicists, the mythicists, the apologists, stuff that I would like hold my nose to read sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
But I tried to be, even-handed with it.
Yeah.
And I hopefully that's reflected in what little writing I did on the subject and on my blog, which you can promote if you want to.
Yeah, sure.
Nobody's even looked at it probably in ages, but it's mythicismfiles.blogspot.com.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description.
Ask me any questions. I'd be glad to field any question that anybody has.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple of pieces that I posted in there are pretty good.
Yeah.
So.
And since we've been hurricane free for a while, right?
Well, yeah, but I got out of Puerto Rico just in time. It took me like 3.5 years to get out of Puerto Rico. I was without electricity for 4 months.
Yeah.
It was like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen that I never want to see again. But it took me like 3.5 years to dig myself out of Puerto Rico and finally return to the States, to Arizona, just in time for COVID.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
Yep.
Oh, let me let my dog out. I'll be right back. Cool. Sorry about that.
Yep, no worries. And the thing with limited theology, just wondering about how did this get here, right? And
yeah,
that
you have to have a sense of wonder because you can't just. And I have to be careful about how I phrase this because that's the entirety of my theology is my sense of wonder at it all.
Well, it's like
I think that as soon as people start putting attributes on it, they've completely lost out on. It's like the Taoists say, if you can name the way, that's not the way.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, and that's very Gnostic with monadism.
Yes.
So that's kind of what it's all about, right? And you kind of you want to know what's really the case rather than what people say the case is.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of the Gospel of Thomas, right? Logion 23.
Which one is that one?
Jesus said, "If the flesh came into existence because of the Spirit, it is a marvel. But if the Spirit came into existence because of the body, it is a marvel of marvels. But as for me, I wonder at this, how this great wealth made its home in this poverty."
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
There's great beauty, actually. There's great beauty. And it's like one of the things that I want people to kind of take away from. Not every atheist is a militant, like, scrapper. You have to be able to admit where beauty resides. And there's a lot of beauty in a lot of this poetry. Not so much in the New Testament, in my opinion. But in a lot of, like, for instance, for me, there's beauty in Corinthians 13. There's beauty in a few other passages, maybe some of the Beatitudes. Sermon on the Mount has some beauty in it. But that's where the beauty resides. It's not in the Christology. You know what I mean? It's in the expression of love, just like any other religion. That's where the beauty resides. Not in the liturgy, not in the Christology, not in the theosophy, not in any of that. That's all arguable, obviously. But the real beauty is, how do you treat people as a result of this philosophy you hold?
Yeah.
That's where
the fruits, right?
That's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. Yeah, and with what survives, right? So we have the written works, but I've heard people say that it used to be like the written works were very small compared to everything else going on, right? There was the oral tradition, there was the secret oral tradition that must have been, only for the initiates, right? Or only shouldn't be written down,
Well,
right?
that's like Scientology or something.
Well, I mean, with Scientology, it's all written down, right? That
Is it?
there's no oral data, right? Because
Well, I don't know if that's true because I mean,
verbal data,
Scientology has its Dianetics and it has its books by L. Ron Hubbard, right?
well, they're
But I
all
think,
by L. Ron Hubbard.
but as they go up the hierarchy, I think they're just making it all up. Somebody's
Well,
calling me. Hold on. No, I'm gonna
I
ignore it.
mean, it's all like kind of earlier where that's what we do, right? Because I mean, the universe is all made up, right? That I mean, you're looking at it with a certain school, right? I mean, religion is. I mean, I don't mean it as derisive, right? But it's putting structure to the universe, right? And it's not the universe, right? But it's trying to
It's
map itself
the
to
map
it.
for the territory. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
confusing the map for the territory. Yes.
So I mean, maps are made up.
Bishop Spong
Yeah.
phrased this really, really beautifully once, and I could probably find it. But yeah, he's talking about it's like we're reifying and putting in a place of reverence uh, the teachings of an actual church, not of anything else, and that's a big mistake. But
Mhm.
Bishop Spong was really eloquent on this very thing.
Yeah. Where
A third century church which gave us these writings, and then we interpret them, and let's even bring them down. Let's say that the writings are second century, even first century if you want to, right? And then the interpretations are second and third century, as developed by a hierarchy, ecclesiastical, priestly hierarchy, and we're supposed to take these interpretations of these writings as the word of God. Come on, man, give me a break. You know, I don't get how.
yeah.
I honestly don't get how in the 21st century there like this kind of thinking still remains. I really don't, but it does, and I have to
Yeah.
accept it.
Well, it's kind of like I mean, it is interesting where we just don't talk about it because we don't want to offend.
Right? I
Whereas
know
like
because we grew up
mathematics
in
and
the
science.
matrix. We're afraid to offend, and that's part of the question, part of the problem. And so I'm not afraid of irreverence because one of the things for me is I'd like these people to kind of realize that yours is not the default position. It's not a default that we're straying from. We're all on the same melting iceberg trying to figure it out. And you think you have the answer because it was handed down to you. And I think that answer is not adequate for my questions, at least. So,
Yeah. Where you wonder with religious thought is kind of poetic, it's kind of metaphorical, like maybe it's not meaning, right? We're not looking for meaning in religion, but there's something else about maybe the poetry related to the physical, right? And the poetry is a little bit outdated because I mean it leads to war and we don't really want to cause war, so we're not going to go there and really flesh it out.
well, it reflects a war god, which is what it was.
Yeah.
And it reflects nationalism, which is what it was. It reflects antagonism towards the stranger. You know, you're supposed to, Deuteronomy says you're supposed to love the alien. Just like in Ishtar, it said you're supposed to not hold Ishtar, but there is Ishtar in the shrine,
Yeah.
right? You're
Yeah.
supposed to love the alien, but there's this heavy, heavy antagonism against the alien in these days, you know? Yeah. I think we're saying the same thing. So yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. Where
Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably religious thought is a little bit behind, isn't it? For
It's
where we're at.
Stone Age. It's we need to surpass this, and that's why I don't actually like to refer to myself so much as an atheist, as a post-theist. We're past this. This should be relegated to the speculations on human or like superstition origins, and what alchemy was to chemistry, theology was to whatever comes out of it.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. I wouldn't go so far as calling myself a transhumanist, but sometimes it feels that way, you know.
Or, there's he's not terribly well known, Joseph Ben David, post-process theology.
I'm not familiar with his work.
Yeah, he's not. He wasn't. I mean, his blessed memory. He's no longer with us.
Yeah, may he rest in
But
peace.
he died, I think, around COVID time,
Okay,
or just
yeah.
recently. But it's post-process theology, where if you're familiar with process theology, it's kind of like there's
Process, is
the
that Karl Barth?
um.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Good girl. Okay.
Karl Barth. Yeah.
Yeah, Karl Barth. Karl Barth, he's kind of like on the opposite spectrum of someone like Paul Tillich. Paul Tillich is the liberal theology. Karl Barth was the conservative theology.
But saying the same thing, sort of?
No.
Or
compared to Karl Barth would espouse traditional, what we would call traditional theology, Trinitarianism.
okay, I think we're talking about something else.
Whereas Paul Tillich was almost a mystic, actually. When you compare him to Karl Barth specifically, Paul Tillich was a mystic theologian.
Got
His
it.
thing was the ground of being. God is not a thing. God is not even an idea. God is the ground of being, which is kind of what you and me believe, but you and I believe, but in a different. He still considered himself a Christian theologian, specifically, because I think what Paul Tillich was trying to do was get it through to Christianity that this is all metaphors. This is all symbols, metaphors, archetypes. This is not theology in the sense of theology in the Karl Barth sense. To Paul Tillich seemed idolatrous, and I agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting the cart before the horse, so to speak.
Yeah.
You've made up your mind that this is the thing you're going to worship, and then you proceed to kind of rationalize it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, there's a dialogue with Krishna somewhere. I think it's in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna, and I'm paraphrasing heavily, where he says, well, there's no real way around idolatry, because what you like, so you have an idol, and that's not God, right? The God of the theology. But really, the God of theology isn't really the God either, right? Your understanding of what you think God is, that's not it. So even in your mind without the idol, that's still idolatry, right? Because
yeah, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the concept in Buddhism about the whole point of Buddhism is to do away with desire. But doing away with desire requires that you desire doing away with desire. So you're in this weird endless loop.
Yeah,
if you
the
take
golden
Buddhism
chain, right?
If you take Buddhism too seriously, you're in this endless feedback loop. Because as soon as you desire to lose desire, you're desiring. So yeah. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how we kind of the metaphors are still kind of true even under, a non metaphysical understanding, right? Or
and the secret is to be still and know that I am God. And it's funny to put it that way, but that's a beautiful piece of poetry. Be still and know that I am God. That's all you need. You don't need any theology. Just sit down, be quiet, and realize who you are, and thou art that. Full stop. You know?
Yeah. It's almost
that's my opinion, and I'm nobody, I realize, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, very Aristotelian, right?
Yeah.
Though, I mean, it's almost like a koan, right? Be still know that I'm God, because what's God, right?
Right.
Just like what's the sound of one hand clapping?
Perfect.
And I've come to the understanding of the answer to the koan is it's the sound of one hand clapping. Right? What is the sound? It's the sound of one hand like just it is what it is, right? The thing that you're talking about, it's what it is, right? And
well, I mean, I think such conundrums are kind of done on purpose to kind of get your mind kind of at least started in the process of thinking about things in this way, you know, because somebody says that sound of one hand clapping, that makes no sense, and they could just drop it, right? But if you really sit down and start thinking about it, you start to realize that, oh, I'm just supposed to sit here. That's it. I'm just sit there. Don't think about anything. Just sit there. Don't want to think about anything. Just sit there. That's what I think useful meditation consists of, you know? Meditation is a hard thing to do because you can't not think about stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Try it. You'll see, you know, it's hard. Yeah.
Yep. And then you start thinking about not thinking.
Right. And that's the mystery.
Yeah. And it's a lot like Werner Erhard, if you're familiar. He had Est back in the day, and now there's Landmark, which is back before Tony Robbins was a thing.
Oh,
right.
Okay, yeah.
There was Werner Erhard, which Tony Robbins borrows heavily from Werner Erhard. Okay. Not to offend any Tony Robbins.
No, but it's like some kind of a get rich kind of a scheme where they sell lectures and feel good kind of rhetoric and stuff like that, or
I mean, that's what it devolved into when people copied it.
Yeah.
Right. But there's the whole. I lost my train of thought. Where were we going with that? There's though you can't turn off the inner dialogue.
Yeah.
Right. That like when you're talking to people, you can't really just listen to them, just like because your mind is going crazy, right? Like, is this right? Is it wrong?
Something I learned recently is that this does not, and this is something I learned recently, this does not apply to everyone. Some people do not have an inner dialogue in that way. And this is something I recently learned. And it's fascinating to me how some people do and some people don't. Because I know some people who can like falling asleep, something as simple as falling asleep. They're like, well, it's time to fall asleep. And they go, kunk, and they're asleep. Someone like me, I have to go through like pages of like dialogue before I can finally crash. You know what I mean? Inner dialogue or whatever. But something I learned recently is not everybody does it. You know, it's different personalities, different psychologies are different that way. Which ultimately what it means is, I guess what it means is that meditation is easier for some people than for others because of that inner dialogue, you know?
Or somebody without an inner dialogue, you wonder if they would even value meditation.
Right. Correct. Because what are you meditating for? If it's not to stop the inner dialogue, what is it for? Yeah. I get that. Yeah.
Which I wonder, I mean, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure if your view is to stop the inner dialogue, because you can't.
Well, there's the paradox. There's the conundrum, because as soon as you start desiring, there you are desiring. I know.
Yeah. Or kind of like where I was going with that, like you're talking to someone and you're interacting with your thoughts on what they're talking about, not what they're talking about.
Yes.
Right?
Sometimes, yeah. And it's a skill that we all should learn to actually listen. Yeah. So with the others,
or are we even actually listening? Right? Because we're interpreting what they're saying.
Well, the older I know this is, the older I get, the more I'm conscious of that. I try to be conscious of that, of actually addressing what someone is saying. You know what I mean? Because most of the time when people engage in dialogue and debates and stuff like that, they're just waiting for an opportunity to say something that they've been kind of ruminating on, and they're not really listening to what's actually being said. That's something I've noticed, you know.
Yeah, which
And
kind of
so,
ironically, I've thought the same thing.
yeah,
Yeah, which is kind of funny on a meta level that we're like we're ruminating on things, and this is the time to express it, right?
well, I
I've
think
thought
you and I
yeah.
have that in common. We're kind of like meta level, kind of exploring. In my case, mythicism and uh, the Dutch radical school, Marcionism, all these other things. You know, it's on a meta level. I
Yeah.
don't like. I used to get deep into the weeds, but at this level, I'm kind of ruminating through all the things that I've read over the years. But it's more on a meta level, where it's like, oh, now that I've absorbed all of this, what can I make of it? You know what I mean? And it's more on a meta level now.
Yeah. Which reminds me of, you know, how Price says, well, there may have been a historical Christ, but there certainly isn't anymore,
Right.
right? That you can kind of turn that on its head and say, well, there might not have been a Christ, but with
There is
all
now.
the philosophy, yeah,
But there is now. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I agree with that.
That, I mean, we can look at like what Christ means to me, and like we look at our times, we look at those times. This is what Christ is like.
Well, babe,
Right.
look at the trend right now in pop for superheroes. Yeah, Superman is not a real thing, but he is now, right? And I think you could explore these what they're essentially are literary characters. They deserve exploration. They deserve study, mythological study, sociological study, anthropological study. But of course, you and I both know that from a religious standpoint, people take it way further than that. They actually start to believe this is a real thing and that their eternal lives are dependent on it. And that's just
isn't that far off. I would think even under like a purely material idea that if we believe like there's no hereafter, but there is a hereafter, maybe just not for us, right? And
well, the party keeps going,
yeah,
whether we're here or not.
yeah.
So
And
in that sense, yeah, it's like hopefully we made enough of a splash that we hopefully made the world a little bit better and maybe even remembered for a little while.
yeah, or
But for the
live
most part,
for like make this count, right? Because your eternity is at stake.
no, yeah, I get that, and
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that because I have this my thing is I'm an atheist and I have no need for theology really beyond what I expressed, but the only prayer that means anything to me is doing the right thing. Everything else is just lip service to yourself and to your idea of yourself in relation to a creator. Anything that's beyond just doing the right thing is just vanity, like the Ecclesiastes says. That's the only prayer that matters to me. You know, do the right thing with what you know. The end. Full stop. Anything else is just lip service.
Yeah. Where you think, what good is like a spiritual existence if you can't even be present in the physical existence, right? That.
Oh yeah. I mean, I over the years I've talked about. I have basically 2 articles of faith, which is basically just 1 article of faith. My article of faith is really simple. Truth matters. And I call it an article of faith because I can't back that up. I can't prove it. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe we're just alive and, you know, the sparkler sparkles and then the little things phase out and that's the end of that. Maybe that's the case. But I'm going to live my life as though the things that I say, as though it matters that the things that I say rightly align with what is true and real.
Yeah. And so it has to be both true and real?
Well, it has to be true because real is bigger than that. I mean, we all have flawed input devices. And so we have to take that into consideration too. And so your certitude has to reflect that. You know?
Yeah.
I could be wrong is always an option.
Yeah. Or, I mean, can you be wrong?
Yes.
Right? Is wrong a thing
I often
that even
am.
exists?
Yes,
Well, I
yes.
mean,
No, I think that's part of my faith. Is I think that yes, it exists.
yeah. Yeah. And what is truth? Like metaphorical truth is truth.
No,
And
what I kind of mean by truth, I kind of mean more in if I give an example, 1 mole of chlorine gas and 2 moles of sodium metal will always give you 1 mole of salt. Always, always, always.
Yeah. You know, I graduated chemistry, or I got, I think it was a B. I forget what my grade was. Wasn't an A, I know that. And I never knew what a mole was. Maybe that's probably why
A mole, if let me drop a mole is 6.02 particles of anything. 6.02 times 10 to the 24th particles of anything. That's a mole.
Yeah. Which, like, what is it?
That's
then?
a huge number. It's a huge number. 6.02 times 10 to the 24th.
How much a molecule of it weighs, or a certain number of molecules?
No, a mole is 1 mole of any substance will give its molecular weight.
Yeah.
1 mole of hydrogen gas is 6.02 molecules of the substance, and it weighs this much. That's its molecular weight.
A mole is like a pound of a thing?
No, it's 6.02 times 10 to the 24th particles of anything.
Yeah.
A mole is that much of the substance. How much does it weigh? How much does a mole of that weigh is its molecular weight? Or something along those lines. It's actually more complicated than that. But that's, yeah. Because there's temperature and pressure also involved, and that will have an effect. But that's negligible for our discussion.
There you go. Well said. All right. And then any thoughts that we didn't?
No, I just want to. I want to thank you personally, because until you kind of reached out to me the other day, I hadn't really thought about like my blog. I went back and I started reading some of my blog, and now that I read it, I'm like, I think I like my blog. People should who are interested in this material should go to read it and beat me up if you think I'm completely off the wall. You know?
Yeah.
Tell me I'm an idiot and tell me why. But this is the challenge that I put forth to all academics. Is I'd like to read a monograph on the genuine authenticity of the 7 Pauline epistles. Demonstrate to me that these came from an individual named Paul, please. I welcome it. I've come across an individual named Verhoff, and I'm about to read that in the next couple of days to see how far he goes into that end. But I've yet to see this, and everybody knows it, which seems to be the reply from everybody that I've asked on the subject is, what do you think that the 7 Pauline epistles are genuine? Basically, everybody knows that. Everybody knows it, and that's just not an argument. It's an unexplored axiom as far as I'm concerned, and I'd like to see it demonstrated before I abandon the Dutch radical thesis.
Yeah.
As my own, basically. It really is. I think that I honestly think that my conclusion so far is that we have 0 primary sources on any of this, and therefore all of it is just speculation.
Yeah, what's the guy's name that's putting that together? Who's analyzing the epistles? And
hold on, let me look it up. His name is Verhoff. Edward with an EDUARD VERHOEF. I found his name in my recent readings, and somebody's saying that he actually did write such a book that explains the authenticity of the Pauline epistles. So that's where I'm going to next. But I have to also be full disclosure. I think he's probably not going to do it based on the criticisms that I've read of him so far. It seems to me that he took the. I'm about to read it on my own, and so I'll make up my own mind on it. But he's being accused by some of doing what's his name? Bart Ehrman did. Well, he's not really addressing actual mythicism. He's addressing a straw man of what mythicism is.
Yeah. Got it. Determining the
Because mythicism, you could take on Acharya S, which I think is easier to do than taking on Doherty or Carrier. Taking on Acharya S, which he did in that book, is easy compared to taking on Doherty or Carrier. And so he took on Acharya S instead of taking on what I think is real tenable questions or tenable challenges.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm looking up Edward Verhoeff here.
I'm about to read it, so I'll let you know.
Yeah.
I'll shoot you a message and let you know what I think.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to do.
But it's my one challenge. It's my one challenge to every single academic is I think that you think, I'm saying this directly, you think that the Pauline epistles are authentic, and I think that there's no reason to really think that.
Yeah. Then you wonder, like, could you put together, maybe it's just too back in history where they did come from, and can you identify the group where they came from?
Yes, I believe it's too far for that. The earliest we can get is maybe the Marcionites and Tertullian, Irenaeus, Clement. That's the earliest we can get.
Yeah. It's a wonder why there wasn't scholarship, like they don't have a...
Well, it's not a wonder. It's not really a wonder when you consider that the entire world was, for lack of a better term, enslaved to this dogmatism. Mm-hmm. It's devotionalism. It's not scholarship. It's not scientific inquiry. It's devotionalism. And even when we drop the devotion, the matrix is so... It's part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't question it.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. Because I remember when I directly asked Richard Carrier why he thought that the 7 epistles were authentic. And he basically said the same thing that everybody says. Oh, it has to do with internal evidence and external evidence. And I'm like, no, because I don't only get you as far as this came from the same school of thought and no further.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That if we look at them, that it seems like a patchwork where it seems that there's certain things that seem a little bit out of place, might seem a little bit out of the time that they were written, right? Like,
yeah.
Where's that knowledge so-called, right? See, that a lot of people have seen a jab at Marcion, against Gnosticism. But yeah.
A gentleman named Sebastian Moll, I gave you this example the other day. He wrote what essentially is kind of like the state-of-the-art book in scholarship right now in religious studies programs, right?
Yeah.
And the book is not good. The book is not good. The book is basically he read Tertullian and reported what Tertullian said about Marcion as here's Marcion. And I talked to him for a little while, and I was so disappointed in that book. If you want to read a good book about Marcion,
mm-hmm.
that's not a good one. Read Judith Liu, read Joe Tyson, read who else? There's one guy who's got what's his name? Richard. His book on Marcion is good, but he's got a bone to pick with mythicists, which makes it a little bit of a polemic. And I don't like to read polemically kind of flavored things.
Yeah.
But his book is not bad though. What's his name?
Murray?
No. It'll come to me in a second. But my point being is there are many better books than Moll's. Please, anybody who's listening along, by all means, read Moll. But you'll see you can read Moll and then read Judith Liu, and it's like, oh yeah, that's not even close. You know, this person is actually engaging like ideas, mm-hmm. and this person is just reporting what Tertullian said.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, there's Dr. M. David Litwa, right?
Beydoun is a good one too, by the way. Jason Beydoun is a good writer. That's a good book.
Yeah, I've not
It's
heard.
called. David Trobish has a good one called the first. Oh, it's been so long that I'm forgetting titles. But David Trobish is his name, and he wrote a really good book about Marcionism and that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a big rabbit hole, as you already know. It's a deep rabbit hole. I've taken, for the last 5 years, I've kind of taken a vacation. I've focused on other things.
Yeah. Well, maybe you'll bring it back, huh?
I've been, if anybody's interested in any of my thoughts at all, and I realize I'm nobody, but I'd like to talk about these things. So if anybody got any questions for me, please shoot them off. I'd be happy to address them. And by all means, prove me wrong. Show me that the Pauline epistles are all authentic. I promise you, I will listen and I will be fair. But by the same token, you have to also give me the fact that I'm thinking on my own and that I have my own thoughts on this and my own reactions.
Well, how about this? The historicity of Marcion.
Yeah, that's fascinating too. I think that the historicity of Marcion is established beyond doubt because he's mentioned as being kicked out of the church. And so he existed.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we could say
approximately in the year 144, he was kicked out of the church as a heretic. We have that in writing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, his insistence on there was a Paul. Does that bear more weight then?
Well, no, like I said, he didn't really insist on there was a Paul. He just had these writings. He didn't argue there was a Paul. He argued Jesus is the Son of God. And here's my writings to demonstrate it.
Yeah.
Here's my sources.
Yeah.
He didn't argue Paul was real and this is why I think that.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, and I'm inclined to think that, with the people writing against Marcion, how they still see that their own theology is in his writings.
Yes.
Right? Like you never omitted this, and like why are you?
Yeah, I know.
He kind of
the little bits of Judaism that are still contained within the Gospel of Marcion are a mystery and a dilemma of sorts. Yes.
Yeah, which tells me, like, how we have.
But you have to admit though that they're very, very little bits, tiny little bits. It's not much.
Yeah.
But some of it did get through the cracks.
So you think?
But it just goes to show. I think it goes to show you that whoever came up with these writings, whoever collected these writings, was trying to. It's Gentiles trying to co-opt the Jewish faith, and I don't understand why, other than opportunism.
Mm-hmm.
In some weird way.
It was a nice hustle they could do to make money.
The church got destroyed, and they saw an opening to kind of usurp that God. I don't know. I don't really understand it. Like I keep saying, take over not just the scriptures, but the God itself.
Or maybe that was their legit understanding. No?
Well, I mean, as close as a God-fearer could. A God-fearer would never be let in on the actual mystery. They'd never go into the Holy of Holies, for instance. That was the priest's role, right?
Got it. Do you think that there were like secret mysteries revealed in the Holy of Holies that didn't make it to the text?
Not in the same way that mystery of religions had, but yes. For instance, a good example is the Holy of Holies itself.
What's in there?
Well, the answer is nothing, but that's one of the mysteries. The mystery is walking into the room, seeing nothing, and getting that insight.
Yeah.
Just like going under the bull for Mithraism into the darkness would give you that insight of, rebirth. I get it. Mm-hmm. It's a metaphor. Rebirth is a metaphor. Resurrection is a metaphor.
So you don't think that there was too much actually revealed in terms of like a mystery religion in the Holy of Holies?
Ultimately, I don't know, but I think that Judaism had those esoteric, just like every other religion does, has esoteric teachings that are reserved for the elite.
Mm-hmm.
And the Holy of Holies is an example of that. Sacrifices are another example of that. Hell, the temple itself was an example of that. You know, the way the temple was laid out,
Mm-hmm.
you know, who could go where in the temple. If you were a God-fearer and you dared step foot in the, you know, anywhere near the actual court of the Jews, they'd dismember you right then and there. And nobody would say anything about it because they were right to. But, you know, I guess I'm going too far with this, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know it to be the case. I don't know it for a fact to be the case, but it makes sense to me that, yeah, I think we have hints that, yeah, they had their own secrets.
Yeah. Where
when Alexander went into the Holy
mm-hmm.
of Holies, Alexander the Great went into the Holy of Holies. He made himself go in. He said, "I'm going in," and he went in. And he found nothing there. But I bet you, even he had the revelation. Oh, I get it. Thou art that. I am that.
So there's a report of Alexander the Great going into the
Yes,
Holy of
into
Holies,
the Holy of Holies.
and there was nothing there?
There was nothing there.
Or do you think that they just cleared the place before he made it in?
No, I think it's consistent with the Gnosticism or the esotericism of the religion. The whole religion actually at that point was about God is, by that point, God wasn't the pillar of smoke leading the Israelites out of bondage. By that point, God was, I am that. Right? Just I am that. You can't even speak the name because it's not applicable.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Have you heard of Dr. M. David Litwa, where there's the polemic that when the sacking of the temple, they found a donkey deity? The people
That
who
was
sacked it?
the people who sacked it found a donkey deity?
Yeah. And that's became a polemic, like you secretly worship a donkey?
Well, actually, that kind of, you're reminding me of the very, very earliest depiction of Jesus that we have. Well, the earliest depiction of actually Jesus that we have has him with short hair and he's holding a lamb. But we have one that's earlier than that. And it's a graffiti. Mm-hmm. It's a piece of graffiti with a donkey-headed person on a cross, which is what you're reminding me of. And gotcha. I'm wondering if that polemic was so widespread that that's what people thought of Christians, as they worship a donkey god. You know, because you're just reminding me of that. If that's what somebody found on their entry to Jerusalem, and that's what somebody found on a graffiti in Rome, then maybe there's something to that. I don't know.
Gotcha. And so that's the earliest known depiction of Christ.
Of Christ as a polemic. Is somebody saying, Alexander or Alexander Mantor or something like that? Alexander Mantor worships his God. That's the caption.
And then, so that's the earliest polemic, or that's just the
earliest mentioned graphic depiction of Jesus that we have.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that dates to about 250, 300. And then we have one after that, which depicts Jesus as a shepherd with short hair, no beard, and that's slightly after that. But the earliest we have is a deploratory, vindictive graffiti depicting Jesus as a donkey-headed God on a cross. Yeah, that's the earliest depiction of Jesus we have.
It's interesting that it's that late.
I know. But yeah, it is, isn't it? Before that, all you saw was fishes.
Yeah.
You know?
Which is weird, like fish entwining an anchor.
Yes.
right?
All kinds of stuff like
Why
that. Yeah.
is that? Like, why the anchor? That's just.
I don't know.
You
And
think
like
it'd
I
be?
said, I don't think we'll ever know. I honestly think at this point, I think we will never know. I think scholarship is spinning its wheels at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We're just rehashing old arguments.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the day, and maybe we won't live through to see it, but I'm looking forward to the day where we'll get an extra like Nag Hammadi kind of find, which will help illuminate this mystery.
Yeah.
Seriously, because
Fingers crossed.
until that happens, I honestly believe that we have 0 primary sources, which means that all of it, 100% of it is speculative. That makes me a hyper skeptic, and I'm cool with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully we get. I don't know. Get some answers.
I hope so. I really do, because
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, I abandoned it like 5 years ago, but I used to read about this. I used to be excited to all the new books that came out and stuff. I would read them all, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating to me. But since I made that determination, it's not really all that exciting to me. I need some sources now to have fun with this again. You know?
Yeah. Or maybe cracking the code a bit.
Or somebody cracking the code a bit, maybe somebody pushing back on what they think is a really bad argument on my part or something. Because what's happening is nobody's arguing against Van Manen anymore. And so they're going, oh, everybody knows that the 7 Pauline epistles are authentic. And anybody who's questioning that is just crazy. Okay, then I'm crazy.
Yeah.
But that's how I see it.
Yeah. Or like if you're familiar with Mithraism, there's Dr. Ulansey.
Well, Mithraism is a little bit tricky because Mithraism has kind of a long, really weird history. It started off in India as one thing, but it ended up in Persia being another thing.
Mm-hmm.
The Persian variety is the one that kind of got, you know, conscripted and syncretized by the Gentiles.
Yeah.
But it goes back all the way to India.
Yeah.
You know?
Where I was going with that is like we really didn't know what the heck was going on with Mithraism because so little of it survives. Right. But you know, Dr. David Ulansey kind of cracked it to where we're like, it makes so much sense now. Like this is what was going on, right? And we can kind of make more dots and connect those dots, right?
I don't know his name specifically, but he probably influeed a lot of the stuff that I read on Mithraism. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff that I've read on Mithraism, that makes sense.
We wonder if we could do the same thing with Christianity, just kind of connect the dots, make more dots.
I think we can to an extent, and I think we should, but I think we won't. Because people are afraid. Why? Because they have this idea in their mind that their eternal soul is dependent on towing the line,
or getting tenure is dependent.
Or yeah, exactly. But that's a different story. But yeah.
Yeah. So we'll just have to make all the higher critical scholars tenure, and then they can say what they want.
Right, and then they won't be afraid to speak their mind. Like I don't know if you're familiar with. Let me look this up because this will be easy for me to find. I think his name is Thompson. Hold on. No, Thomas Brody. Thomas Brody. One of my favorite things to field in this particular thing is like they go, well, you know, only atheists. You have to be an atheist to be a mythicist. And I'm like, no, Thomas Brody was a Dominican priest, and he's a mythicist. Wrap your head around that. Why? Because he recognizes that the Logos is much bigger than a historic biographical thing. The Logos goes way back, and the Logos is an idea. It's a metaphor. But Thomas Brody was a Dominican priest, full-fledged Catholic Dominican priest who happens to be a mythicist.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Well, and it's not terribly controversial in the Church of Sweden, which incredibly liberal, right?
Well, yeah, Scandinavians got wise a long time ago. Yeah, their numbers, their church-going numbers are like nil compared to
Yeah.
the rest of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to belong if you want to be married or baptized or
Correct. Yeah,
get a
because that's
funeral in the
tradition.
church.
That's what I'm talking about. It's like the matrix we grow up in is so densely based on this
Hmm.
that you're being offensive, basically, if you say anything that contradicts it.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of an iconoclast. I don't care anymore. So
Yeah. Or
I should have died 5 years ago, and so I don't care.
there you go, near death
You
experience.
know what I mean? Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. So yeah, good deal. And then any other points that we didn't bring up?
No, I just want to thank you for having me and for for the time. This has been kind of cool discussion, I think.
No, yeah,
So,
absolutely. We'll have to do it again. Maybe get on a specific topic, like
sure. And
I don't know, we'll have to, yeah,
if you want to
figure out
include me on any discussion that you have with anyone else, I'd be
you know,
glad to.
I've been thinking of that. Like we'll do on a Sunday, and we'll really hype it up. We'll do Parallelomania this Sunday.
Yeah, look me
And
up.
it'll
I'll
just
be happy to help you out.
yeah, like
Seriously.
over 150 tenuous parallels with Christianity, each one more tenuous than the next.
The thing is, though, is that some of them are real, but if you throw them all into the pot, then you just got this nasty like mess.
Oh no, it'll be amazing.
Yeah.
Right? It'll be like monster truck rally, and like we can have like legitimate scholars. They'll just
Sunday.
Yeah, exactly.
Sunday.
There'll be the monster trucks that will like smash all the tenuous parallels, and then we'll just get more incendiary parallels, right? And then they can be smashed. It'll be like the
my particular
going through the flames.
Yeah. One of my favorite like absurd things that I've come across in the study of early Christianity is, did you know that Aomori Shingo, Japan has the burial place of Jesus? It's in Japan. Did you know that?
Now I do.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Where some people, like, if you like, that's swoon theory, I'd imagine, or does he resurrect and then he just?
No, it's kind of related to the swoon theory where he escaped. Yeah, that he and James both escaped. He actually, in the legend, he and James were both crucified. In the Japanese version of the legend. It's fascinating.
I didn't know that there was a thing. Maybe we'll do that.
Actually, I wrote one of the pieces on my blog deals with this. It's called that essay is called like Parahistory or something like that. A Laughing Matter. Parahistory, a Laughing Matter.
Yep.
It deals with it. I talk about the Shingo because I'm trying to make a parallel between when does parahistory become laughable and how does that relate to mythicism. That was the point of that essay.
That works. Good deal. Well, thanks so much for coming. We'll have to do that next time, or we'll just Japanese Christianity. I've never even heard that they had.
No, sure, I'm happy to talk about any of this stuff. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to doing it again.
Yep, absolutely. And then anybody who's watched till the end, thank you so much. And then you can always like or dislike. That also helps. I always like to point that out. And
challenge me, please.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed it. It was fun.
All right. Peace, bro.
Yep. All right.